If we're going to apply some of these big ideas that I've offered you just in the last session to where we live, one of the ways I think it might manifest for many of us who maybe own our homes or have access to land is what I call garden farming, or small-scale intensive horticulture, food production, land management, land care. And this is where permaculture sort of, the rubber meets the road. We actually get our hands in the soil and we make things happen. We change the way we live and we change the way we care for the environment. So the first part of this talk is supported by some notes that I've put up on this, will put up on the screen. And then I have another slideshow at the end which illustrates what we've done at home in Bloomington, Indiana. So I'm going to get right into it and start by talking about permaculture principles. This is a model of permaculture principles based on the work of David Holmgren. He published a book about 10 years ago called Permaculture Principles and Practices Beyond Sustainability. And I have organized the 12 patterns that he gives into a circle, and I call it the wheel of permaculture action, because I see that what we do unfolds in this way if we're paying attention, if we're following an orderly process of interacting, designing, and modifying the landscape and the systems around us. So the world is filled with events. Things happen. Trees fall in the forest. Schools open or close. Factories. People get married and take up living together, or don't get married and take up living together, and they start changing the world from those events. Whatever event, you can apply permaculture design to anything because it's a holistic thinking and systems thinking. So what it's doing is what I criticize the regular economy for not doing. It's taking a look at all the forces and all the factors, and it's costing it properly and evaluating and connecting everything up. So we begin at phase one here with this observe and interact, and we're going to move around the wheel in a sunwise direction. Observe and interact, that's the first directive in permaculture. Wherever you are, you need to pay attention. And the symbols here sort of indicate this. This one looks maybe a little like a tree, but it also could be a person standing like this with astonishment at the world. You can't see the detail very closely, but we need to observe. That's the beginning of any design process. You've got to gather information before you can make any changes. And the interact part is a recognition of what modern science has proven to us, that there is no such thing as a detached observer. Even at the molecular level, when we observe electrons moving, we can't know everything about them. There's fundamentally a mystery at the center of the universe. But we're involved in it, which is the good news. We are interacting with our ecosystem. It's responding to us. And you can really find this out clearly for yourself if you go out in nature. And as soon as you arrive, everybody who's doing something out there will stop doing it. And by everybody, I mean the squirrels and the birds and they'll just stop. They'll get quiet. It'll be like, chill out, predator. They can only do that so long because that's where they work. They got to get back to work. So about 20 minutes later, if you sit still, they will start chattering and foraging and flitting about. And then now you're part of the system. Your eyes are there taking it in. Your consciousness has embraced it. You're integrated with it. That's a metaphor, if you will, for what we need to do with our home landscapes and our communities and neighborhoods. It's like observe, recognizing that you're also part of the system, and interact. The second phase, second principle, is to catch and store energy. Everything in nature runs on energy, and the energy storage in nature, well, there's several, but the big ones are carbon. And that's carbon in plants and biomass, including all animals and insects. Carbon in soils as humus and organic matter. dead plants, animals, and such. And water stored in the bodies of trees and water stored in soil. Interestingly, the more carbon there is in the soil, the more organic matter there is in the soil, the more water you can store in it. So we can drought-proof our landscapes by increasing carbon storage. And we also see that nature stores energy in the form of information. And that's largely DNA, and even at the higher levels, it's culture and learned behaviors. So animals in particular are able to transmit learned behaviors both genetically and by modeling to their offspring. And people do that more than other animals. We convey whole cultures symbolically. We write things down and leave it for our descendants long gone, after we're gone. So we can catch and store energy, and that's carbon, water, and genetic information and other forms of information. So every permaculture system is going to be rich in those kinds of stores. And the more you have of them, the more life you can have, the more action you can have. The aim here is action in the sense of living action. So we want to store energy. The symbol here is sunshine in a bottle. It's like you have to make hay when the sun shines, and you have to capture biological energies when they're available. That's one of the things that makes them a little more challenging to work with than, for example, oil in the pipeline, which can flow at any time of year and be made into a million products. We have to catch sun when it's available and turn it into plants when they can grow and store them when they're ripe at the right time and so on. But other forms of information are available more widely. Other forms of energy, information, for example, can be available at any time. So we want to catch and store energy. What we're doing is charging a battery. Carbon in particular is the battery for life in the soil and in the ecosystem. The more carbon we have stored, the more life we will have. And what we've been doing globally is running down those stores of carbon by exhausting carbon out of our soils, by plowing all the time and chemicalizing. We've run the battery down in our landscapes. And that's what I meant when I said we needed to do ecological restoration, even as we also derive our living from the landscape more. So if we observe, we're gathering information about the system. As we catch and store energy in particular, we're building up carbon reserves, water reserves, and genetic reserves. And then principle number 3 is to get a yield, which means we have to eat, we have to be fed, we have to be paid. So this isn't all altruistic. Yes, we're helping to restore nature. Yes, we're building up resilient economies for the sake of everyone in our community, but we're also getting our needs met. Food, energy, water, shelter, company, good work, all of those things need to be coming out of the home economy first, the neighborhood and community economy second, and only at a distant third out of the global economy. This whole set of patterns, 1, 2, 3, is part of a phase that's involving the release of energy. In ecosystem terms, when you cut a woodland down or you cut the grass in your front yard, you are releasing stored energy. And you're knocking the system back to a simpler state where it doesn't have as much storage. The first response to any kind of event that causes a disturbance is to quickly gather all the loose bits and hold on to them so that we can do something going forward. Because if we just keep cutting and cutting, harvesting like people do in their suburban yards, cut the grass, cut the grass, cut the grass, or that we do in our agricultural fields, plow and till and harvest and carry away and not return anything, we impoverish the system and it won't work. So we're recognizing this moment of release happens all the time: fires, floods, mudslides, disturbance, tree death, all kinds of things happen in nature. What happens normally is that all that released wealth is quickly grabbed by everybody nearby. So we're modeling nature here. In this phase, we're simply recognizing that there are always releases of energy. They pulse through the natural world, and we need to be present and attentive to them and harvest them in, and be sure that we too get fed by that process. Now, as that goes on, we enter another phase, which is about reorganizing those loose parts once we've sort of gathered them all up. And now we have to self-regulate and accept feedback. This is negative reinforcement. This tells us there are limits. Some things we should do only so much. We're involved with others. In other words, we have to leave something for the smaller creatures, and we have to tithe and give back to the larger organisms of which we are a part. Involuntarily, that is taxes. Voluntarily, that's charity or sharing. But we also have to take care of the little creatures, the worms in our soil, our children, our animals, the wild birds. We have to provide something there, or not take that which they also need, because they feed us. The worms are building the soil in our garden. So we have an obligation to keep that soil covered so they have habitat and don't dry out and don't have to dive down and hide. They can do their job of digesting organic matter and provide us with richer soils. That's part of this regulation and feedback cycle. We're entering into relationship, and we have to find our place. What are the limits of what we need to do? What's appropriate action? Part of the discipline and reorganization is also to recognize, use, and value nature's gifts. I talked about this a little bit in the earlier show, in which I said that we're accustomed to using natural resources, but we often don't think about using natural services. So this is one of the forms or gifts of nature that we should recognize. So the symbol here is a horse. Some cultures eat horse flesh, but most cultures use the horse for services. Horses pull carts and plows, and people ride on them. That's just one way in which nature provides services. Nature provides services. The biggest service nature provides is it keeps the planet relatively stable in temperature and levels of oxygen and all of these things. The atmosphere and the oceans do that. But we've taken that for granted and used those as our sewer to dump waste gases and waste chemicals and everything. And now those systems are stuttering and faltering and not being as effective as they've been, so that the conditions for life are being threatened. But at every level that's going on. We need to recognize that even though it looks like a kind of a mucky place out here, this swamp behind us out the windows is providing enormous amount of services to life. Sandhill cranes flew in this morning and ate, and deer migrated across the prairie as we were rising. Those services are valuable. We might not eat the cranes, but they will eat pests that we don't want, and we might eat the deer. And that's a gift from nature that we want to recognize, use, and value. It means that biological systems are often more productive and safer than industrial ones, if we do all the cost accounting, because there are no externalities. Everything is folded in. The wastes become food for something else. And that's our sixth principle right there. Energy cycling. Waste not. Make no waste. Turn waste into food. Bill McDonough, the architect at the University of Virginia, who's written Cradle to Cradle with Michael Baumgart, has said there's two streams. In the industrial economy, everything should be disassembled and reassembled as parts or as raw material by chemical or mechanical means. And in nature, everything composts. So at home, we don't let any organic matter leave our property, ever. I mean, any measurable amount. All paper waste is mulched or burnt in the stoves to make heat. Sticks and wood, if they're small, go in the garden to become mulch to feed the trees and the plants. If they're large enough, they go into the stove to heat us. Old materials that are made of wood, we take apart. Window sash, if it's no longer useful, we pull it apart. The window sash goes in the scrap pile to either be reused or burnt. The glass gets a new use, all of that. Everything organic stays in the system. Nothing leaves. So it all becomes food, at least for soil. At least for soil. This is a fundamental. Don't waste anything. Don't throw away anything that could be consumed by some other organism, whether it's worms or poultry or hogs or, your neighbor, for heaven's sakes. Now this whole cycle is a big in-breath. This is us orienting to the system. This is learning Ecosystems 101. This is like study of nature. Get in the program, dance to nature's dance. Learn the rhythm, move with nature. Now we're good at this. This is our disciple stage. This is our student stage. We're like following the steps of the master, okay, until we can do that without stumbling. And then from the bottom up, our actions begin to impose or infuse our intentions and our needs more and more carefully. So we design from pattern to details. We begin, after we have completed, in effect, our apprenticeship, by learning natural systems logic. We can apply it in patterns over the broader landscape, over our systems, our home systems radiating out from the house, through the garden, all the way out to the edge of wild nature, where we do very little modification, where we go as students to continue to learn. In our domestic systems, we create patterns. And permaculture has some very key patterns that it uses. One of these is called zone and sector, which begins with an analysis of all the environmental influences coming into where we live or where we are designing for. And that's the sun, the wind, the movement of animals, the drift of pollen and seeds across the landscape, the influence of genetics and of pollution or of threat or nice views, all these kinds of things. You have a question?
Yeah, is that part of the observe and interact? Like, is that a key part of it?
Indeed, there's quite a parallel. You see, these are opposite the wheel from each other. Here we're just gathering impressions. We're like taking it in like a sponge. And here we're using that in an analytical way. This is much about simply soak it in. Use all of your faculties to learn. And here now we begin to think about that information that we got, and we develop it into a pattern. The zone and sector pattern, which I have an example of here. This is a sector analysis in my little cartoon drawing. If we had zones, they would be radiating out from zone 0, which is the home, all the way 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is the wild. So we might see this as the home, the garden, the orchard, the fields, the pastures and woodlot, finally the wild zone, the forest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is a sector analysis. Influences from outside always come in. They always have a direction. The sun is here, always in the south, but this is summer. I got to use this. This is summer, or winter rather, and here's summer sun, much more sun. So that's a bigger sector. Here's a scenic view. Here's noise coming from this direction. There's the animals moving through the wildlife corridor. There's winter winds blowing in, summer breezes here. Fire might be coming up a slope here or from some source. We often don't think about fire as a risk where we are, but fire too has a direction, and we need to analyze that and consider where the risks lie. So I'll cut back to here. That's the kind of patterning we apply to landscapes. And it integrates a lot of environmental awareness and information into a plan that enables us to locate all the elements of our system in the right place. So where would we put, for example, the chicken coop? If we're wanting to have chickens and we have a home, according to this pattern, we would see that the winds are primarily coming from the westerly direction. And while we want the chickens to be close enough to go and get the eggs and to put them in and out a couple times a day, 730 visits a year, plus the times that you have to run out in the middle of the night and chase the fox off, or the weasel, that's a lot of visits. So you don't want them way far away. About as far as you might be, as maybe from me to the wall, 50 feet might be good. But not upwind, because sometimes, maybe you didn't clean out the straw soon enough, and, there's a few extra birds right now. Okay, so downwind, 50 feet away, on the edge of the garden and the orchard, so that they can go into the garden and clean up things, or they can go into the orchard in the fall and eat the fallen apples and fruits and eat the bugs. So now that analysis told us where to put the chickens so they will be happiest and we will be happiest. So a lot of permaculture uses this whole science of location, design science. All right, that's what we talk about, what we mean by pattern design, and start from the big pattern and then work down by layers to details. Big picture thinking, bottom-up action, right? Top-down thinking, bottom-up action. All right. Integrate. As you do all these things, don't just build the chicken coop, put a roof on it and a gutter and a water barrel, and then you have water for the chickens. Put a tree over it so the hawk can't dive in and get them. And make that tree a mulberry or a locust so that it's dropping seeds or seed-rich fruit so the chickens can eat them on their own. Nobody can ever eat all the mulberries, right? There's just too many of them. Or whatever it might be for where you live, something that will feed the birds. And then at the bottom, where the water is running off the chicken yard, plant a row of comfrey, or in some climates bamboo, or something that will just love that extra nitrogen. Just love and suck it up, and let you harvest the leaves to feed back to the chickens, or to make medicine, or to mulch anywhere else in the garden. That's integrated design. Think about all the functions. Everything has multiple functions. Anything you have around you should have at least 3 functions, and the 4th function is beauty. At minimum, 3 functions. If you can't think of 3 things that it can do, don't have it. It's not worth it. How do you get systems to work efficiently on a small scale? You have things do many job descriptions, many roles. They play many roles. They have to do lots of work. So you can't have one tool for each separate job. You have to have a set of tools that can do all the work you need to do. Same thing with plants and animals and structures. So we integrate them together, and that means we use vertical stacking. We put things, little plants under bigger plants, all the way down to the ground. So we use all the space vertically as well as horizontally. That way we get more capture of solar energy. We get more yield from the same real estate. Relative location. So that's the tree next to the chicken yard where it can drop its fruit directly and the birds can get it, and we don't have to carry it. That's one form of relative location. The windbreak over here rather than over here, right? Put the windbreak over here, it's not going to do as much good as if we put it over here. These things are commonsensical, but we often find, you go and look at any house up and down the road, they don't face the sun, most of them. They face the street. Well, that means the resources are coming from the street, which has been true, but it's not going to continue being true. So we have to figure out how to change our houses a little bit so they can actually turn toward the sun and get that energy for free. Choose small and slow solutions. That's our 9th principle. By integrating, we can do things on a smaller scale and get higher yields, get more feedback, get more payoff. Small steps are easy to make, and when you blunder, they're easy to recover from. So the reason we learn to walk when we're this tall is because it's not so far to fall to the ground. That's the same logic. Choose small and slow solutions. And for the most part, it matters because we know we're going somewhere we've never been. Our culture has never been where we need to go and where permaculture is pointing to. So we've never really been there. People at different times in past have lived somewhat like this in balance with their environments, but not at the technical level that we have now, and not as postmodern people. who don't have all those skills and who don't have those cultural patterns and have to reclaim them from our great-grandparents long gone and their stories in our memories, from books, from people who are experimenting, from our own experiments, from theory that we test and maybe it works, all these areas. From science, we need all that. We have to make a lot of mistakes, and we have to do it in a short time. And the best way to do that is stumble and recover, and pretty soon, you know, like a drunk, you're walking, you know? You're falling down all the time, but you're walking, you're getting somewhere. So that's the point of small and slow solutions. We have to make a lot of mistakes, and we have to learn from them rapidly. And so the safest and best way to do that is by taking small steps. But mind you, we have already looked at the big picture. So we know where all this information fits in when it comes to us. Right? Okay, this is about exploiting what we know, exploiting the resources we've created and organized, and extending the system. And now in this last quarter, this last quadrant, we work diversity, which means we build up diversity in our systems, in our cultivated systems, that can even exceed the range of diversity that exists around us because we've created so many special kinds of conditions to support it. We, in our home systems and our gardens around our houses, have many more microclimates. We have more water available. We have the ability to remove limits to production. We can put our crops in the winter into a greenhouse and have them go on growing, whereas out in the open, they'd freeze out. We have lots to work with. We can enhance diversity. All the crop plants, most all the crop plants that our ancestors developed over the last 10,000 years of agriculture came out of conditions where, by and large, they were really rich microenvironments. They were often subtropical mountain ranges or places where near the coasts, like around the Mediterranean, where there were many different microclimates in a small area. It's like these were big experiment stations for human horticulture. And out of it grew all the crops that we still use today. Everything that we eat and everything we grow, basically, was discovered and domesticated by illiterate people 3,000 years ago. There's been virtually nothing really done since. A little bit of, mixing up the genomes we already had. I think that we separated the rutabaga from the turnip about 400 years ago in Sweden. That might be the last major crop that emerged. And I don't mean yellow zucchinis. That doesn't really count. That's like pink somethings or blue this or that. I mean a new food plant, figs or apples or cotton or something, right? So that was all done by illiterate people tinkering in the backyard, just like you're going to go home and do. So take heart. Small and slow solutions give rise to diversity, and we work it. And the work part here is key. It's not just a matter of collecting a whole bunch of stuff like a museum. It's a matter of what really produces for you. Your permaculture system might have 300 to 500 plants in it. Or like Joe Hollis in the mountains of North Carolina, it might have 1,000 plants in it since he's an herbalist. In an acre or less than an acre. I don't know how many plants we have. I stopped counting about 200 2 years ago, and I haven't had time to go back to the inventory. We've added many more since. But, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 of them produce most of the food we eat. And the others are there playing supportive roles. And so we need to sort that out. So part of the working with diversity is exploring it, expanding the range, and then sifting and settling, right? Okay. Plant, like the Chairman Mao said, let 1,000 flowers bloom, or words to that effect. Let many things come in, and let us see what really prospers. Because in the end, climate will determine it. Your abilities as gardeners will determine it. The soil types will determine it. And then you'll find maybe there's 10 good crops. And that's great, and that's enough. And then there's a little seasoning and a little spice and some flowers and something for the chickens and all of that. So we will have diversity in that way. We've really worked it out. Push the edge, meaning pay attention to the margins. The action is at the edge. In permaculture, the edge is where the action is. Talked about the edge of that dam. The action is all the overflow. Well, the edge between the woodland and the meadow is where the interesting assembly of plants is, and the ones that we're most interested in, and where we always position ourselves in the ecosystem. If we're living in a prairie region, we plant trees around our houses. And if we're living in the woods, we cut open a section and have a lawn. Because we always had both the woods in our background and the savanna, the open ground where we could see the game and we could go after the meat. And we need the resources of both types of systems. So that's where we settle. That's where we build our homes. That's where we're comfortable. You know, we like to be at the edge. How many people hang out in the doorway to the kitchen at a party, right? I mean, that's the cluster, right? Everybody's always right there at the edge. You want to be where all that talk is going on. You want to be where the food is, right? So you've got to be right at the edge or be moving through it all the time. So work that edge, push it, widen it. In our permaculture systems, we expand the edge. We have lots of edge. So our gardens are crenellated and have long pathways. And our contour beds have huge edges for capturing silt and nutrient and water. So we need to expand the edge, and the edge is where we will find greater diversity, greater richness, more resources. And it's true in a conceptual sense too, because we look to the edge and to the edge people and edge cultures to find out where innovative things are going on. When you say at the cutting edge, people are saying, well, they're out there taking a risk. We don't know where the edge is until we get to it. And then suddenly we know. And now we can do like, you know, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and dance up and down the edge, because that's where we want to be, because that's the most productive point. So we find it and then we work on it, and we live much of our life there. And the last phase, of course, respond to change, which is a lot of cultivating the right attitudes to live in this way and being prepared for the next event, because there is going to be one, you may be sure. You don't know what it is, or maybe you have some idea, but it's going to come, and there will be another cycle of this and endless cycles of this. So this is the practice. This is the discipline. We learn to do these things to get in tune with the nature's program, and we learn to do these things to shape the landscape and the system around us to meet our needs. And always we're culminating in a prepared attitude. So the mature culture is the one with vision. This is what we're really growing out of our permacultures, is vision, the long view to the future. We don't know what that is. We know that 7 generations from now, our descendants will have wanted us to look deeply into these issues and be ready, and to leave them a legacy of rich natural environments, of seed, well tended and cared for, of knowledge about how to grow all these things and what to do with them, and how to share and how to live in peace. This is what we want to be preparing ourselves for. All right, so that's the little lesson. We'll move on and look at some of the components. I explained this as the sector analysis, and always we would do this on any site. And I've given some examples, but you could think of others. We certainly want to pay attention to all of the components that are here. You know, where does the wind and the sun, those are the big pieces. Where is fire? Often it's an invisible sector. We have to suss it out. We have to think about it. Let's see, it would be coming uphill on the hot, dry side of the property, where down below someone might be accidentally or on purpose setting a fire, like people jogging by or tossing a cigarette out of a car, or sparks from the railroad, or that sort of thing, and then say, oh, I think it's probably likely to be here. The fire might be 22 years away. You don't know. It might be tomorrow. But you can think about how it would behave in the landscape and plan for it. By putting fire breaks, by storing water, by putting vegetation there that won't burn easily, by building walls that are non-combustible, by putting your road over there so that you use what's already an incombustible surface as a fire break. Genetic drift, that's all kinds of things. We have pollution. Maybe it comes in lots of ways. It might just settle over us generally, but it also might be from the farmer who's spraying, or the neighbor who's spraying, or the town who's spraying the roads or something. noise, odors, threats. Maybe strangers walk down the highway and might potentially be, a source of crime or invasion of the property. These are all things to analyze and then compare and mix with our center-based zone system so that everything radiates out. The zones analyze the action of people on the landscape, just like you'd look at a light bulb. The heat and light are greatest at the center. The interactions are greatest at the center. And the farther away you get, the more diffuse it gets. The less times you can go out there. That's physics. Just count them. You can only walk to the edge of the property a few times, but you can go out off the back porch 20 times a day and not wear yourself out. So that's where you put the salad crops, whereas the black walnuts are planted over the hill. You see them once a year, no problem.